My life passion is to explore cosmos, life, consciousness, and meaning, if any. This is the foundation of Closer to Truth. My perspective is science to ground truth, and philosophy to peer under the surface and over the horizon. But while science is universal, transcending culture, philosophy is less so, influenced by culture, especially philosophy of religion, which addresses ultimate meaning, if any. But I've been biased. I've approached philosophy of religion from a largely Western, analytic perspective, skewed to Christian philosophy. If I truly seek ultimate meaning, I must break my own boundaries, escape my own comfort zone. This is why Closer to Truth now embarks on a new journey, global philosophy of religion. We're excited to collaborate with the University of Birmingham in the UK on the Global Philosophy of Religion project, which fosters honest interactions among philosophers from different faith traditions. In today's fractious world, could deep dialogue about ultimate meaning be transformative? What is global philosophy of religion? I'm Robert Lawrence Kuhn, and Closer to Truth is my journey to find out. Global philosophy of religion seeks fresh views and ways of thinking from diverse religions about ultimate questions. Global philosophy of religion does not seek soft unity and does not avoid hard differences. To do global philosophy of religion is to ask how different traditions address similar topics. How do Hinduism, Buddhism, Chinese, Islam, Judaism, and African traditions, as well as Christianity, address fundamental questions? What is reality, consciousness, God, person, self, soul, spirit, inner life, evil and suffering, life after death, reincarnation, science and religion, essence and existence, eschatology of the world to come? This is Closer to Truth's master plan for global philosophy of religion. I begin with the leader of the Global Philosophy of Religion project, an innovative philosopher of mind and religion, Yujin Nagasawa.
There are more than 4,000 religions in the world. And if we want to take religion seriously, we have to look at a variety of religious traditions, not just the Christian tradition. For example, in the Judeo-Christian tradition, there is this long tradition of systematic theology. So there are a lot of clear arguments concerning the existence of God and the nature of evil and that kind of thing. Maybe in other traditions, people are not really familiar with this kind of approach. Maybe they approach philosophical issues from a more empirical or experiential perspectives. But nevertheless, I would think that there are some common issues that we can address from multi-faith perspective. So you might not necessarily have a systematically structured logical argument about religious beliefs, but nevertheless, we can approach this clear way of addressing philosophical issues by incorporating diverse perspectives.
You're not trying to find the lowest common denominator of the...
No, that's
exactly the opposite of what you want.
Yeah. So we don't want to say that actually all religious traditions, they're all the same. The beauty of the diversity of religion is that there are so many different ideas, and some of them are clearly incompatible, but that's an important part of global philosophy of religion.
To do global philosophy of religion is to appreciate the core philosophical foundation of each different tradition. I begin with perhaps the most ancient, Hinduism. I meet a Hindu monk, author and lecturer, the spiritual leader of the Vedanta Society of New York, Swami Sarvapriyananda.
So almost every question that one could ask for Hinduism, the answer would be yes and no. Do Hindus believe in God? Yes and no. Is God male? Yes and no. Does God have a form? Yes and no. But it's not impossible to get a handle on Hindu thought. For that, we would have to go back to the texts which are accepted by Orthodox Hinduism. These are the Vedas. Now, mass of it is ritualistic writings. But what interests us is the other portion of the Vedas, the so-called knowledge portion, the Jnana-kanda. There we find texts called the Upanishads, which are probably humanity's oldest collection of philosophical thinking. Based on these Upanishads, you have a variety of schools of thought which developed over millennia. If you ask, what is the philosophy of Hinduism? The one-word answer would be Vedanta, in all its extraordinary range and development. The word Veda means knowledge. So the Upanishads, they contain what one might call the final, the highest spiritual, philosophical teachings found in the Vedas. So Anta literally means the end, not really in the sense of the end of the Vedic corpus of texts, but more or less the end in the sense of the final or the highest teachings. Now, these Upanishads are open to interpretation, because if you see them in translation, they look like poetry. So after the Vedas comes the age of philosophy.
For all the schools put together, what are the core categories of Hindu or Indian thought, the pillars on which the edifice of all Indian thought is built?
One would be, of course, the search for freedom from suffering, and they have different names for it: moksha, nirvana, kaivalya. Then another important category would be karma and rebirth, that there is a causality. Just as there's causality in the natural world, there's a causality in our moral world also. And it's incredible that Buddhists and Hindus who don't agree almost on anything, God, no God, immortal self, no immortal self, but they agree on multiple births, and multiple births because of karma. Then there would be multiple conceptions of the ultimate reality. From the non-dual Brahman of Advaita Vedanta to the personal God of the Vaishnava Vedantins, to the pure consciousness and material nature of the Sankhyan dualists, to the momentary stream of consciousness of the Buddhist subjective idealists. Then the self, that's another big category, Atman. So who are we, or what are we? And all of these schools are convinced that we are spiritual beings. We have a physical element, but we are spiritual beings. But what's the nature of that spiritual being? The broad term Atman is a major category in Indian thought. And this is rejected by the Buddhists, who have a radically different understanding of the self. But the self, concepts of self, would be a major category. Samsara.
Hinduism's sophistication is no surprise, but its diversity is. Next is Hindu's geographic compatriot and philosophical adversary, Buddhism. I meet a Buddhist nun with a master's in comparative philosophy and a doctorate in religion from Yale, Venerable Yifa.
Traditionally, people give the definition of what is religion. And they always have like 3 elements, like the founder and the teaching and the community. In Buddhism, also include these 3. So, the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. I mean, sometimes the people also argue, maybe Buddhism is not really a religion because without God. And so, of course, the definition of what does mean a Buddha means, and it's a enlightened one. I think that everyone have their own religion, each person. For example, my grandma think that the Buddha is a god, but for me, the Buddha is the awakened one, a person, a human being, but because he attained the enlightenment, so he's a life philosopher as my guidance. So I find that when we come to religion, it's everyone from our own consciousness to create, or each one's own world and each one's religion. In Buddhism, we always call you depend on the truth or the teaching, the Dharma, not the person. What I'm looking for is the truth. I have to say, just the first step is to understand my own, limitation, or even as a human being.
Yes.
So it's eye, ears, nose, tongue, and body, and mind. So in Buddhism, we call these 6 organs.
Oh.
And as a human being, this sense organ has a limitation.
Sure.
Because I'm confined by this, all the information I perceive are not really the reality. We have to transcend it, not just use this ordinary sense organ to find the reality. And that is why we always say, like a meditation, contemplation. Buddhism is not just a kind of metaphysical philosophy. It's very pragmatical. In the Buddhist sutra, it says the reality, the truth, is not created by the Buddha or by the human being or by the deity. No, it's there by itself.
When Buddhism was developing in India, Taoism was developing in China. What were the indigenous Chinese philosophies? I speak with the director of the Rutgers Center for Chinese Studies, Tao Jiang.
Chinese philosophy started with the problem of the collapse of a particular order that was in place. And all of the classical thinkers were trying to bring that back or trying to reimagine a new kind of order. So there was the dominant strand. There is the Confucians and there is the Maoist. The dominant one, the Confucians one, is the one who advocates partialism. This partialism that says that we would cultivate our virtues within the family and gradually extend that outward to encompass the world. Now the Maoist would say, well, no, that's wrong-headed. We actually need to model, sort of a heaven that is impartial, that everybody should be treated the same, just like heaven, just like the sun that just shines on everybody without discrimination. And then you have Mencius, right, who would, reject this kind of impartialist view, because for Mencius, how can you not treat family as special? I mean, that's just intrinsic to us as humans. And then you have the Laozi, one of the so-called Taoists, who critique both the Confucians and the Maoist, who say that they were both misguided because they try to universalize, in the case of Confucian, they try to universalize this partiality into this universal partiality. So you have the sage king extend outward, but then it's always centered on these sage kings. And then you also criticize the Maoist, saying that if you have to have the kind of universalized standard, you're invariably imposing, very heavy-handedness in order to impose the kind of criteria. That's also not very in accordance with the way that humans are. And then you have the Zhuangzi, who is very the singular thinker in the early Chinese intellectual scene, who advocates a personal freedom, who formulates really the ideal of a person, of an individual that is preoccupied with the inner life, and that's not reducible to the political and moral consideration, that it's the well-being of the person that is really the concern.
Now, none of these have as core objectives some kind of ultimate afterlife or goal or spiritual goal that would characterize Abrahamic religions.
So for some reason, when they think about the Tao, it's always the way of thinking about how does that help us dealing with what's in the human realm, about how a life needs to be led here as a person personally or as a collective.
I'm now ready to address the Abrahamic traditions, and I begin with the non-Western Abrahamic religion, which in the West is much talked about but perhaps little understood, Islam. I meet a distinguished Islamic scholar and teacher, the president of Zaytuna College, Sheikh Hamza Yusuf.
Islamic philosophy has two roads. One of them is the philosophers themselves, people like Al-Kindi, Al-Farabi, Avicenna, and they pursue a very specific philosophical track. The other track, though, is really a philosophical track that's profoundly rooted in the Islamic tradition itself. And so you see the flourishing of it with people like Al-Ghazali, and then ultimately moving into the great scholastics of the Islamic theological traditions. And so it's a very rich tradition, but it's rooted in the Quran, and I think it's rooted, first of all, in the idea that the world is created, that there is an ex nihilo creation of God. So they're very interested in proving or giving rational beliefs for that. So the Kalam cosmological argument comes out of that, this idea that to prove the world had a beginning, and also the end of the world. I think the Muslims generally, our tradition adheres to a kind of correspondence theory. There is an idea that God has created a world that is matched with the mind, that it's not a trick, it's not a Cartesian demon who's fooling us in some way. We're not in the matrix. Yeah. That my experience of you, that you are objectively real to me, and that my mind experiences you, and that I can assume that you indeed do exist. And we can exchange ideas because our minds are designed to be able to collaborate in that way. There are many verses in the Quran that say that God created the heavens and the earth with truth, bil-haq. The beautiful word in Arabic for world is alam, which means the instrument of knowledge. And so the idea is that the particulars of the world are meant to take us to an aggregate that leads to an understanding that God created the world. And so it's designed, and our minds are designed to move towards a knowledge of God.
That's a natural theology approach.
It's a natural theology. You know, some people think religion is telling us to stop thinking and just simply become dogmatic and just be fideistic. And the Quran is saying, think. Haven't you looked at the camel, how it was created? Haven't you looked at the winds, how they work? So there's this idea that there's order in creation, and that order has to have some design. I mean, one of the reasons that the Quran gives for understanding God is that there's a kind of providential care that God has given us.
From Islam, I appreciate the utter transcendence of the one Creator God. One God, of course, is the hallmark of the first Abrahamic religion, Judaism. And although we use the phrase Judeo-Christian commonly, close to the truth has also underweighted Jewish philosophy. I meet an analytic philosopher of Jewish thought. He is also a rabbi, Aaron Segal.
There were certainly attempts in medieval Jewish philosophy to sort of lay out what are the fundamental tenets, what are the fundamental dogma of Judaism. 13 principles and Maimonides, and some even have more. But other thinkers suggested you can narrow these down to 3. I should say God is one, right? I mean, that's sort of even prior to these 3 tenets that they lay down. There is a God and there's only one God. But there's more to it than just, right, that there is a single God. It's that God relates to the world in a certain way. And so the 3 tenets have to do with 3 points in history, right? So this world of ours is a creation of God. The Jewish tradition says that everything, absolutely everything there is other than God, owes its existence entirely to God. And then there is an idea that there's a redemption, right? That this world that we see is broken in many ways to be a state, right, in which the world maybe returns to how it was at the outset before things got a little messed up, or maybe even a greater state, right? Maybe the redemption is in some ways greater than, higher than, more valuable than how things were made at the outset, right? And that has to do with the role of creatures. And so human beings are addressed by God and called upon to take part in the unfolding of history, in bringing about a state of affairs in which there is a redemption or in which there can be a redemption. And the message isn't so much concerned with metaphysics, it's not so much concerned with the nature of reality, it's very much concerned with duties, devotion, right? What it is that we are called upon to do.
Having explored the major non-Christian global philosophies of religion, something is still amiss. Often overlooked, even in global philosophy of religion, are African traditions. Africa is a crossroads of indigenous religions, Islam, and Christianity. I meet a philosopher of Islamic and indigenous religions of West and North Africa, Oludamini Ogunnaike.
There's a lot of diversity on the African continent, but some of the things that you can look at across a lot of different cultures and contexts are a normative sense of personhood as something that is achieved, a sense of personhood as being relational, this notion of Ubuntu, a person is a person through other people, an emphasis on ancestors and lineage, and a kind of direct communication with the spiritual world. If I had to generalize, I would emphasize this boundary between the spiritual and the physical being very porous, a very strong sense of divine immanence, the importance of ancestors, and the importance of community, and a very strong normative ethical stance, even though that normative ethical stance is often very plural. So the particular taboos and way of life that you're supposed to follow can be radically different to mine, but you need to do what you're supposed to do to be a good person, and I need to do what I need to do to be a good person.
Having traversed global philosophy of religion, I return to my opening premise. Western philosophy of religion, and closer to truth, have focused on Christian philosophy. And to my opening conundrum, what to make of profound religious disagreements? Should I seek general principles that could unify diverse religions? I ask a philosopher of cognitive science and of religion, Helen de Cruz.
If you look at in Western philosophy departments, most of the stuff that they write about is Christianity. And I think one of the things that they could do is look more broadly. And one of the nice consequences this would have is the problem is disagreement. Religious diversity is now often seen as a problem. Like, there's this mystery, like, if God exists, like, why do people go so wrong? But I think you could just take it as a datum. You could just say, there is religious diversity, there is religious pluralism, and that is philosophically interesting. That is a thing that we have to take as part of things we know about religion, and we go from there and we do our philosophy of religion. So if you have all those different religious traditions, and they illuminate something about the human experience and maybe even transcendent reality, so we can learn from them. Most religions, comparatively speaking, have the idea that there is some sort of purpose. They have the idea that there are intentional agents, or there is an intentional agent who is more or less personal, that humans have some form of existence beyond death. So those are sort of things that we can look at and wonder about, like, why do we have them, and what can this tell us about ultimate reality?
Global philosophy of religion does not hide differences, nor seek simple harmonies. Rather, global philosophy of religion celebrates the beauty of diversity. Here's a global snapshot. In Hinduism, great diversity. God, yes and no. Male and female. Form and no form. In Hinduism and Buddhism, freedom from suffering. Multiple births because of karma. In Buddhism, enlightenment. No God. Human limitations. Transcendence through meditation. In Chinese philosophy, stressing the human realm. In Islam, God creating the world from nothing, a world that is real, leading to knowledge of God. In Judaism, one God, engaging the world via creation, revelation, and redemption. In African traditions, personhood and the family, a porous boundary between physical and spiritual. What we find in global philosophy of religion is religious pluralism, which illuminates the human experience and perhaps reveals something about ultimate reality. Now, going the other way, what is a unified ultimate reality that most religions could accept? Some sort of purpose, intentional agents like God, existence beyond death. Here's a corollary benefit of global philosophy of religion. bringing together all who think differently and seriously about ultimate questions from diverse religions, races, ethnicities, nations. Can philosophical dialogues on ultimate questions help build bridges and help stop bombing bridges? No Pollyanna here, but it's worth a try. Catalyzing a global conversation on ultimate questions, global philosophy of religion is a new objective of Closer to Truth.
For complete interviews and for further information, please visit closertotruth.com.